Everyone, I guess we might as well get started. We've got a small group today, but I'm very glad to see everyone. Hi, Tony. Hi, Mark. Sorry, hi, Mike. Hi, Hans. It's it's great to be able to put this on at the end of this week of action on Christian nationalism. So, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to present like what the idea is behind this aspect of the campaign. Make them hear us. Some of you might have seen the videos that have already been like presented by some people. And so the basic idea is, now that you've signed the letter, which thank you so much for doing that. We want to make clear that these are real people. And the idea is to collect video and text-based messages that will hopefully, get the attention of those whose attention we want to get. So what I'm going to do is just, go through talking about reasons for speaking, what to say if you're not sure what to say, and how to say it. We're going to go through some practical pointers. I'll have some time for Q&A. And if you have questions, as I'm going, feel free to drop it into the Q&A. And then, yeah, then what I'd like to do is at the end, basically an open mic, and it's small enough that I can give you the floor if you would like on the spot to, hey Sarah, to say something based on what we've just been talking about, to say something directly to one of the people addressed in the letter. I'm going to welcome you to do that at the end, and I will edit it into a video. All right. So with that said, I guess we should get started. And, by the way, I do want to give a shout out to my wife, who has been absolutely indispensable, Naomi, in helping me make sure that this entire presentation is semi-coherent, both in terms of text and images. And she's actually just been a really a crucial presence behind the scenes. So why say anything? I think this is a question that I asked myself before I started this open letter. Why speak up at all? And I would say that the reasons that motivated me to speak might also be the reasons that motivate you to, go beyond putting your name to the letter, which I deeply appreciate, and actually go on the record yourself in your own words. So here are just a few reasons that motivated me to write this letter in the first place, and that you might consider if you're thinking about contributing, but you're not sure why to do it. So the first thing I would say is um, we need to remind these politicians and pastoral enablers of our humanity. I think it is very easy for that to be erased or obscured um, if they see a list of names, which carries power certainly in and of itself. Um, but I think that power is enhanced when we drive home the point that each of those names belongs to a real person with a real biography, with a um, real family, a real network, real stakes to these issues, that they're not just theoretical. I think, it's always difficult to predict um, how an addressee will respond, but I do believe that might be corny, but I do believe that insisting on our humanity does communicate something important, whatever degree of resistance might be there initially for the person who is being addressed. The other important motivator for me is, if you've been paying attention, democracy is not doing so great. What we have right now is a major party, one of the two major parties in this country, is explicitly devoted to ensuring that as few people make their voice heard as possible. So in that situation, I think both the politicians and their pastoral enablers need to be made aware of the role that they have played in doing that. You know, one aspect of anti-Asian hate that is important to highlight, beyond it being traumatizing and horrific and cruel in and of itself, it is a symptom of the erosion of democracy. It is a symptom of a society in which certain classes of people are discouraged from speaking out through threat of violence. And beyond reminding people of the bare fact of our humanity, I think reminding them of the fact that we have a common life, we share a polity, is, I think, extremely important. And then third, this is kind of a strategic reason, and that's to make this issue inescapable. Uh, the more people speak up, the harder it is to ignore. And this is not just about those who are being directly named, but also bystanders. I think through many of these incidents, we've seen that bystanders can make a critical difference. Whether a bystander is compelled to intervene and ultimately steps in could be the difference between life and death in many cases. So to make the issue of anti-Asian hatred and Christian nationalism inescapable, I do think that there has to be a critical mass of voices who are, ceaselessly, perhaps even annoyingly from a certain perspective. And that is one of the things that I personally had to overcome, was the risk of being seen as annoying. I think over the past few months I've had to get over that. But it's critical that there be a mass of people whose voice is constant in order to gain the necessary attention to induce change. So, clearly, as you've signed, you've clearly showed that you desire that change. So this is just a natural step in that direction. All right. So those are just some of the reasons that I came up with. Right. So let's say that you have decided that you want to, like me, put your face on the internet, or at least your own personal words with your name. Then the question is, what do I say? Right. And that's, again, a totally understandable question, and one that I faced at the beginning. So, I'm going to give you just a few ideas that might be useful to you. They are drawn from examples from some of the messages that have been put up already, directed at the pastoral enablers and or the politicians. So first thing, the most basic for those of us who, to whatever degree hold the Bible in high regard, which is many, though not all, of the signatories, since there are people from other religious traditions. But I'm assuming that many of us do have a high view of the Bible. And that, so one thing is to simply remind politicians and or pastoral enablers of the very explicit texts that through their actions or inactions, they might be enabling. So here, Steve Cato, one of the signatories, wanted to send a message to Ted Cruz, Pastor Greg Matt, who is the pastor of Houston's First Baptist Church. That's Ted Cruz's church. The greatest commandment, love God, love your neighbor. I'm Christian, I'm Asian American, I'm your neighbor. Stop the hate. Very straightforward, clean, direct. I don't think it's hectoring or quote unquote Bible thumping. It's just a simple and straightforward message. So there are any number of texts that you could look at, right? Matthew 25, of course, is the one on which the name of this project or my Twitter handle is based. Xenos is I was a stranger, right? I was a stranger and you did not invite me in. I think this is the go-to text when we're talking about xenophobia. And, it is worthwhile reminding particularly pastors who might have an eschatological bent, which is no small number of these pastors. I actually have an article coming out about apocalypticism, and it's linked to anti-Asian racism. But, this is a very familiar passage to those people who might have a recurring fascination with eschatology, right? So That's one passage to keep in mind. We also have, let's see, Leviticus 19 concerns loving the stranger who dwelleth among you. Oh, I'm sorry. I just realized that my screen was blocked with gray blocks. Okay, hopefully that's a bit clearer. But the stranger who dwelleth with you shall be unto you as one born among you, right? Thou shalt love him as thyself. We have here the second greatest commandment, which is like the first, bound up with an injunction to love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Um, Moving on, let's see, what do we have? James 3. This is one that one of the signatories, Christopher Tay, quoted in his own message about the tongue, right? And the difficulty of taming the tongue, which I think is certainly appropriate given the inflammatory rhetoric of many pastors. Proverbs 26. Like a madman shooting firebrands and deadly arrows, so is the man who deceives his neighbor and says, I was only joking. One thing that we've learned is the extent to which racists love to hide under cover of irony and humor. And that's actually something that goes back to the Nazis themselves. If you look at the historical documents, that they were no stranger to using that as an excuse for spreading hatred. Just to go through some of these quickly, James 4:17. If you know the good that you ought to do and you don't do it for them, for you it is sin, right? That's about sins of omission, which I think a lot of these pastoral enablers perhaps might need to hear, that it's about what you don't say as well as what you do say. Romans 7:19, same thing, right? This is kind of like Sunday School 101. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. Luke 10 concerns, which passage was this? The parable of the Good Samaritan. I think this is kind of a no-brainer too, right? And also deals with, you know, Martin Luther King's famous meditation on this text. He said the real question is what'll happen, not what'll happen if I do stop, but what'll happen to this person if I don't stop to help them, right? Romans 12, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. I think they're emphasizing the everyone, meaning everybody in America, not just a favored class. I know I'm glitching a little bit. Apologize for that. From the least to the greatest of them, everyone is greedy for unjust gain, and from prophet to priest, everyone deals falsely. This is a pretty clear. Wow, I'm realizing, I'm sorry, I'm realizing how much I'm glitching right now, so I might just stop the video for a second. Okay, that might be a little better. Everyone deals falsely. So this is, reminding of the long history of clerical abuses. And then Matthew 12:36, everyone will have to give account on the day of judgment for every empty word they have spoken. Again, an eschatological bent. And I think that can be useful, as I said, in light of the fact that eschatology is an abiding point of reference for evangelicals, right? I'm sure you can think of others. Another strategy that is helpful is to simply offer back to either the pastors or the politicians their own words. This is from a signatory, Chang Kim. He quoted the website of Tom Cotton's church. It states the following: all people, regardless of gender, race, or nationality, can and should be transformed by the life-giving word of God and faith in Jesus our Lord. That's on their own website, right? Regardless of gender, race, and nationality. And in fact, many of these churches do have, quote unquote, diversity statements. And to some extent, I'm sure that reflects some kind of sincere desire to deal with racism. It's just that desire is not consistently applied or made manifest. In this video, I can give you another example. I relied on an interview that Dan Crenshaw gave to CBN, and here's just a clip of it.
Talking about God giving you strength to live your own best life. Screw everybody else. Freedom of choice for...
All right, so I got a little hot under the collar there. That was video that elicited a concerned response from my mother. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think the value of expressing emotion is. But the point is, in that email, in that video message, I did highlight choice words from Dan Crenshaw. Um, Family history, highlighting your family's history. This is something effective that Christopher Tay did in his own uh, message. Here, let me fast forward so you can get
Both
a sense.
Asians and Americans of Asian descent. Your words trigger in me a fear that my children and any children they have will be made to feel as unwelcome. Might they be tempted to hide the Chinese origins of our family name as I once did? The irony of it all is that my parents were forced by their previous government to erase their Chinese identities to take on more Indonesian sounding names, came to the US and found freedom to call me my father's original surname. Christians should oppose racism.
So there at the end, you can also see that he also used the words of Kevin McCarthy's church, right? But I think what I was worth highlighting about Chris Tay's his testimony, for lack of a better term, is that he highlighted something specific from his lineage. And it wasn't just like a random anecdote, right? And I think that is where it starts to get tricky. And I do sympathize with that, figuring out what do I say of my own history, to prevent it from sort of devolving into a cool story bro moment. I guess you do have to be somewhat selective. So his purpose there was to foreground the fact that his family's presence in the States is because they were fleeing persecution based on race, in part, and that the tragic irony is, whereas the United States has traditionally prided itself on, giving your poor, your huddled masses, those who come here are now increasingly finding that meta narrative no longer holds, right? So, he had a very specific purpose in telling that family history. And I think for those of us who do have stories to share about our parents or grandparents, or where we fit into a longer history, I think that can be really powerful, because the Bible does talk a lot about genealogies, right? And I think the concept of genealogical history is still something powerful that can make an impression. Um, Experiences of racism. I think that this is about as literal as it gets, right? These are examples that were taken from a recent report on anti-Asian racism. I think it's from virulenthate.org. And of course, these are extremely visceral examples, a bicyclist throwing a bike, and people being shouted at. I do think that there is value, even if it's a subtler form of racism, in sharing that story. For example, when I think this was about 10 years ago, I was on a subway train, and there was this guy on the subway train who was blaring Fox News on a portable radio. And I thought politely asked him to turn down his radio. And he proceeded to get up and start yelling and pointing at me and accuse me of being a Chinese spy whom Obama was letting into the country. Um, Needless to say, I was extremely uncomfortable. Right now, he didn't physically attack me, but that's sort of the perpetual foreigner trope in a nutshell. He immediately looked at me and thought, Chinese person, spy, Obama. And we're seeing the exact same configuration today, right? Conflating China with espionage with the Democratic Party. So you may have had experiences like that, particularly over the past year. And if you feel comfortable, I think that can really illustrate the stakes. Um, then there's the strategy, which is just presenting facts. So I'm just going to give you a few numbers that really crystallize the problem here. 800% is the percent that anti-Asian rhetoric increased online after March 2020, March 2020, which is the month that Mike Pompeo basically mainstreamed use of the term coronavirus. 2 million. That's the number of Asians in America who are currently at or below the poverty line. And this is a dimension of anti-Asian hate that, I frankly think deserves more attention. The people who suffer the worst are those who cannot afford health care if they are, assaulted, who are traumatized but can't afford mental health care, those who might be undocumented, and have little recourse or feel they have little recourse to law enforcement. And there are a lot of Asians in America for whom this is the case. I think appealing to that fact and saying, if the gospel is going to be good news for the poor, which is, these are the literal words of Christ, then it has to be the good news for all the poor, right? 55%, that is the percent of, what is this percent? Sorry. Surveyed white Americans who score above the mean in terms of attachment to Christian nationalism. So in other words, over half of surveyed white Americans, this is from a Perry and Whitehead study, they're the sociologists who wrote the book, Taking America Back for God, over half showed an above average degree of attachment to Christian nationalism. So this is not a fringe ideology, right? And therefore, the politicians and pastors we're talking about aren't just influencing a subgroup or something like that. 3,795 to 6,603. That is the before and after number of hate crimes reported to Stop AAPI Hate during the month of March 2021. So it basically doubled almost within 1 month. So this problem really is not going away. So all of these numbers, certainly made an impression on me when I was doing my research. Oh, and there's just one more, and that would be the number of racist tweets amongst all tweets about Asian Americans stemming from major politicians over an 8-month period in 2020. So in other words, between January and August 2020, amongst all, for every 10 tweets about Asian Americans from a major politician, one of them had some form of anti-Asian or anti-Chinese sentiment. To me, that is a disturbingly high number. So, I think that's certainly one route to go if you want to say, hey, just, don't just take my word for it. Here are just the facts, right? And I think particularly when, the go-to rebuttal on the right is that, the left doesn't believe there's such a thing as quote unquote objective truth, or, that's just, in the words of the Big Lebowski, that's just like your opinion, man. I think it is helpful to say, no, it's not just my opinion. These are very clear statistics. And then finally, I think it is powerful, or can be powerful, to appeal to a sense of solidarity. And this might work more for people or addressing members of these churches. In other words, one of the 7 demands is to call for members of these associated churches to live in solidarity with those who are negatively affected by their co-worshipers, and to decide that, as a member of Ted Cruz's church or Kevin McCarthy's church or Lindsey Graham's church, whatever the case may be, I am going to use what influence and leverage I have to oppose their harmful rhetoric and legislation, rather than passively aiding and abetting that rhetoric and legislation. And so, for those who would like to foreground that demand, I think that can also be a really necessary and urgent signal to send. All right. So then the question is, you figured out what to say. how do you say it? And my watchwords have been loving but unwavering. And for several years, I actually taught King's Letter from a Birmingham Jail in my freshman comp class. And I'm always struck by these lines at the end of Letter from a Birmingham Jail. King is writing to these white moderate pastors. This was actually featured in the recent PBS documentary on Billy Graham. You might have seen it, but he's talking to white moderate pastors who were urging restraints on the civil rights movement and saying things like the words of Christ need time to come to earth. So he is critiquing what he calls their gradualism. And he goes in pretty harshly. He says, I've almost decided that the bigger threat than the KKK is the white moderate who basically says peace, peace when there is no peace. So by the end, he knows that he has potentially riled up his addressees. And he says, if I've said anything in this letter that is an understatement of the truth and is indicative of an unreasonable impatience, I beg you to forgive me. If I've said anything in this letter that is an overstatement of the truth and is indicative of my having a patience that makes me patient with anything less than brotherhood, I beg God to forgive me. So, kind of a clever rhetorical move there, but he's basically saying, please forgive me if I've understated your commitment to justice. But I also need God to forgive me if I've overstated your commitment to justice. So there's actually the possibility that I haven't been harsh enough in this letter. So it's a very careful balancing act. But, he does not mince words in the letter. Despite the notable exceptions, I must honestly reiterate that I have been disappointed with the church. And he goes on at length about that disappointment in this letter. And he names names. He doesn't just leave it as a vague generalization about moderate pastors. That the names of the pastors are named at the start of the letter. So I think that it is good and necessary and helpful for the people we are addressing to hear from a full range of humanity, a full range of human expression. And just as King, I think rather gracefully moves between anger, for lack of a better term, disappointment, loving remonstrance, and even some measure of self-deprecating humor. I think that is a good model for the aggregate tone of all these messages. That's not to say that everybody has to, do that. Some people are going to veer more toward simply expressing their frustration than others. But my point is that's totally fine. I think on one hand, there's no need to, come in bursting a capillary or a capillary. But at the same time, I don't think it's the worst thing, actually. And this might be in illicit disagreement. I don't think it's the worst thing to communicate some measure of anger. Anger is a sign that a boundary has been violated, and anger, when channeled, I think is a natural means of conveying the violation of that boundary. So some practical pointers. I was sort of aiming for about 1 to 2 minutes for video, 100 to 200 words for text. Lighting from the front for video. Also checking to see whether your video is glitching, which I clearly didn't follow my advice today. Checking audio for video, making sure the audio is relatively clear. Including your name is optional, but encouraged. Also, if you would like me to blur your face, that's totally fine. And I do understand that. I would just ask that you let me know. And, you can actually upload a URL to a downloadable file via the website againstchristianxenophobia.com right now. Okay, so let's see. I wonder if the glitching has receded. Let's see. Okay. All right. So I know that that's sort of been a torrent of information. Does anybody have any questions? You feel free to drop it in the chat. and I hope that we have some people who might be willing to share their thoughts. And if you have, if you'd like to speak, since there's not a lot of people, you can just put your hand up and I'll unmute you. Does anybody have any questions about like the open letter in general? Sarah asks, are we asking them to denounce XYZ politicians' actions, words specifically, or denounce anti-Asian speech and actions broadly? And will there be a centralized public way for us to view and track responses of churches when we contact them? So this is a very good question. I guess I should have unpacked what I aim to do. I'll get to Michael's question in a moment too. So first, Sarah's question, it's really up to the person who it's up to the preference of whoever would like to record a video. So you can denounce specific actions. For example, I don't know, Ted Cruz's Protecting America from Spies bill, right? You could talk about the way that contributes to an atmosphere of distrust in general. Or, if you prefer to just kind of zoom out and look at the big picture and say, look, the sum total, whether it's this tweet or that legislation is damaging. I think that is completely legitimate as well. In terms of a public way for us to view and track responses, so what I'm going to do is once we hit a certain number, I will be emailing whichever churches and or politicians have been addressed via these messages. I'm gonna be sending out more information about this next month, but I think once we hit a critical mass, we would actually like to begin contacting churches strategically. So, for example, one thing I would like to plan is for, let's say, Methodist signatories. I think it would be powerful if Methodist signatories put their signatures to a shorter message, let's say to Dan Crenshaw's overseeing conference. Dan Crenshaw belongs to the Texas conference, right? The Methodist signatories writing a letter saying, we have signed this letter asking repentance from Dan Crenshaw. We direct your attention to it. And just basically letting them know that, here's this letter. Amongst the 600 signatories are these Methodists who are co-religionists of Dan Crenshaw, right? And if and when there are video messages, I think in that initial communication, we will include those video messages. And then what I will do is there's a section of the site devoted to updates. So I know there's a lot of tabs on the site, so I apologize. This has all been a crash course in web design for me. So when you go down here to updates, I will update. I will include a new section that includes responses from churches. So I will be updating it here, and I will of course post to social media as well. So I hope that answers your question. But yes, I want there to be transparency in terms of the responses from churches. Okay, Michael asks, it's okay to name the politician in the video? Yes, absolutely. And I guess I should have been clearer about that. Chris Tays specifically addressed Kevin McCarthy. I specifically addressed, I did one about Dan Crenshaw as well as Paul Gosar. And I think that is helpful, actually. Particularly, let's say you're talking to a pastor and you say, we all know that this extremely influential and powerful person attends your church. I think it's not only totally okay, but can be strategically really useful. Have pastors responded to me? Not yet, because I have been waiting, basically, and we are hitting approaching 700 signatories. For a while, I've thought that 1,000 would be a nice round number, after which I would sort of start the writing churches from my, again, xenophobia.com email address, and formally notifying them of this project. But I have not had any communication from any pastors so far. Any follow-up questions? I'm happy to answer as well. I know that I've sort of been a faceless name for a while, so I'm happy to answer any questions. Okay. So, yeah, at the risk of being somewhat awkward, I'm going to stop sharing. I thought I would be good to just like kind of open the floor. If anybody would feels moved, kind of like as an open mic. And I can and will edit these. Oh, Sarah asks, will some video messages people send to churches be publicly available if they so choose? Yes, and in fact, I guess I should also clarify. My default, unless you ask me otherwise, is going to be to post the video messages, as is already the case on the website. And that's because part of the idea is that it is strategic, and the point is not just to directly address the politicians and pastors, but generally to draw attention to this project. That being said, yes, if you would prefer that, to just send a message to the church, I can just post it as an unlisted YouTube video or something like that, and send it to the church and not post it on the website. All right. So, and if other questions come up, feel free to drop them in the chat. Oh, you're in charge of sending. Yes, I will be sending. If you would also like to, like, the idea that I had was I would be sending and CCing, the persons who have addressed a particular politician. But if you would yourself prefer to notify the church directly, I want to leave that flexibility. So again, I'm flexible, so it's up to the preference of the person who's recorded the message. All right. So, yeah, I thought I would just open up the floor. We have about 15-ish minutes if anybody wanted to say something. Now you're more than welcome. Oh, I've just been prompted to make sure everybody realizes. Yeah. So what's going to happen is I am recording this, so I can edit it together afterward. And I can even, like, if you say something it's totally okay if there's like ums and uhs. You know, I have definitely been known to do that myself, and I just end up editing it out later. And yeah, absolutely. If you would prefer to just record it later, you're of course more than welcome. I just wanted to give the space in case it was more convenient for some people. Well, maybe what we can do is maybe it would be more helpful if I just played a few examples. Maybe would that be helpful? I think it might work if I just share my screen, and you get some more ideas of what this looks like in practice. Um, so why don't we do that? Let's see. So if you go to the website, you can see. Wait, let me make sure that the the sound is working. All right. My wife has been indispensable in coaching me through running this webinar. So forgive me for all the random gray blocks. I'm learning on the fly, obviously, how to do this. Okay, so here's Chris Tay's entire message. Maybe it's worth just playing the whole thing.
My name is Christopher Tay, addressing the Honorable Kevin McCarthy, who represents the 23rd District of the Golden State. Congressperson McCarthy, I was born and raised in the high desert, and like you, take pride in my Christian identity. As a Christian brother, let me tell you how you've hurt me personally, not to sow division, but to call you to account for how you treat people, whether or not they share your faith or citizenship, as I happen to do. Taking into account the geopolitical motivations you have, there's no doubt you intend to keep the CCP accountable. But can you understand that Asians in America, as well as Christians in China and elsewhere, are negatively impacted by the carelessness of comments that perpetuate heteronormative, white, Christian, US nationalism? Would you acknowledge the need for nuance concerning socioeconomic, religious, and cultural complexities, given how your words and actions are perceived as a warrant for bigotry? Will you recognize the horrific killings recently in Atlanta as instantiations of anti-Asian misogyny and self-professed Southern Baptist formation? During my years as a youth pastor ministering in a number of Asian American immigrant churches in Southern California, I saw the perpetual foreigner and model minority myths pervade the minds of young Americans. Presently, I serve in a paragovernmental capacity that is accountable to communities of faith and the broader public, which is why I'm personally speaking out against the yellow peril that you and your colleagues recklessly engender. You'll note that my last name is strangely spelled for how it's pronounced, being a product of several historical instances of xenophobia, colonial exploitation, and political unrest. Suffice to say, as a US-born citizen, I have been made to feel that I do not belong in my home country. Comments like the ones you have made about the COVID-19's exotic and overtly geopoliticized origin continue to marginalize both Asians and Americans of Asian descent. Your words trigger in me a fear that my children and any children they have will be made to feel as unwelcome. Might they be tempted to hide the Chinese origins of our family name as I once did? The irony of it all is that my parents were forced by their previous government to erase their Chinese identities to take on more Indonesian sounding names, came to the US and found freedom to call me my father's original surname. Christians should oppose racism, a good word indeed, which no doubt you recognize from Valley Baptist's belief statement on the Christian and the social order. There is no Christian nation, only those pretending in vain to be one. So help you God. I appeal to you as a fellow Christian, US citizen, and public servant. Be mindful of James 3, 8-14.
One thing I should mention is that I edited that together. So he recorded the raw video of himself speaking, and then I had some time, and I will have some more time over the summer. So what I did was I found, I found some images that I thought would be compelling accompaniment to his words. So a lot of that is public domain footage and pictures that I edited together. But he didn't necessarily talk about specific acts or legislation that Kevin McCarthy had done or said, but he instead talked about the impact generally. In terms of whether to address politicians and or pastors, either or is appropriate, I think. And in fact, that's a great question, because the next one that I can show is one. This was actually recorded by a pastor, Johnny Rashid, at Circle of Hope in Philadelphia. It was actually two parts. I haven't been able to edit the second part, but this is the first part, so you can get a sense of what addressing pastors might sound like from a pastor.
Hey, I'm Johnny Rashid, and I'm a pastor in Philadelphia, and I want to address the pastors of members of Congress today. Christian nationalism is a real threat and a real presence in our churches, and if we're not careful, we will be breeding grounds for Christian nationalists, just like the one who killed and targeted those Asian American women in Atlanta. It is essential that we interrogate ourselves and our churches to see what patterns and what theologies we teach and that we use that perpetuate this kind of violence. It's important that we take responsibility for wasting time talking about things like critical race theory instead of Christian nationalism, not acknowledging that our teaching on sexuality is limited and that toxic purity culture led this man to do this as well. This sexist, racist crime is connected to our churches. It is not good enough for us simply to condemn the killings. We need to do something about them. Truly, there is no condemnation in Christ. So we are now free to repent of our complicity in these actions without fear of condemnation and with only benefit. The gospel is at stake. When Christians use the name of Jesus and do these things, people don't want to follow. It hardens the soil for evangelism. So let's till the soil of evangelism and change how we're approaching this as a church. So pastors, please look inward and see where God is convicting you to change. Don't ignore it. It's not good enough simply to condemn the killings. We have to hold ourselves to account. And Jesus is with us, so we need not fear condemnation. We shouldn't avoid it because of that. I pray that you look at what you feel threatened about in our society and wonder if that's a real issue. I hear a lot more from Christian leaders about the dangers of critical race theory, cultural Marxism, progressive ideas in general, but I don't hear a resolute condemnation of Christian nationalism.
Oh, I'm muted. Sorry. Thank you for bearing with me through all these various self-inflicted technical anomalies. What I was saying was, what I like about Pastor Johnny's message was he highlighted the role that fear plays in, keeping people silent. He said, we don't have to be afraid of introspection. And, sadly, I think that is true of a lot of pastors. All right, why don't I play one more? And I know that we're almost out of time, and I guess, I thank you so much for taking the time this whole hour to be here. So I'll just play you one more to give a sense of a message that addresses both pastors and a politician. So this is my message to Paul Gosar. Representative Paul Gosar, Creighton University, and the Roman Catholic Diocese of Phoenix, Arizona. I would like to address you one at a time. So I'll start with Representative Gosar, the self proclaimed proud Catholic Christian whose idea of being a proud Catholic Christian is to equate quote unquote Bible based theology with a rejection of quote unquote cultural Marxism and quote unquote leftist politics, which basically means a rejection of anything to do with caring about racism or climate change. In other words, Paul Gosar, you have shown very clearly that you are not a Catholic first, you are a Christian nationalist first, who has figured out a way to ingratiate himself to the infamously anti Catholic white supremacist movement in America, at least up until recently, since these days your fellow travelers include Catholics like Nicholas Fuentes, who is a member of the neo Nazi group Identity Europa. Paul Gosar, you've flown under the radar long enough. You incited hatred by posting this disgustingly racist term 3 times on your website last year, basically birthing use of the term Wuhan virus online, causing it to be retweeted 24,000 times in a single hour. Then you helped plan Stop a Steal. You worked together with Andy Biggs and Mo Brooks and Ali Alexander. And now we find that you have extended your efforts to pushing pure, unadulterated white supremacist talking points in your America First Caucus policy platform with your fellow traveler and fervent Protestant Christian Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, there's no way to put it other than when you insist that there must be a quote unquote common respect for uniquely Anglo Saxon political traditions, when you insist that quote unquote European architecture and particularly its progeny must be respected, you are affirming white supremacy. And you do this in spite of claiming to follow a Jewish Palestinian who was crucified by the Roman state. So, Representative Gosar, we call on you to repent. And we also call for solidarity from Creighton University, where Paul Gosar attended, as well as solidarity from whatever his current parish is. Creighton University, you have a statement on your website that says that you claim to care about systemic racism. And indeed, Black Americans have experienced systemic racism on their health, wealth, education, freedom, and lives. Asian Americans have also experienced that systemic racism. We are bound in a single garment of destiny. And to the extent that people like Representative Paul Gosar use xenophobia to distract people from their disastrous handling of the coronavirus pandemic, which has disproportionately affected Black and brown people in America, i.e., perpetuated systemic racism, Paul Gosar has slashed at and threatened to destroy that single garment of destiny. So we refuse to let him, and we call on you, Creighton University, to show solidarity with us. Use whatever influence you have on your former alumnus or your current alumnus to urge him to repentance. And if he does not repent, disassociate yourself from him. Issue a public statement declaring that you have nothing to do with the version of Christianity that he has been so terrifyingly successful at propagating. And the same goes for whichever parish he attends and for the leaders of the Phoenix Diocese. This is not a game. If you claim to be on the side of the one who was crucified by the state for standing with ethnic minorities, then I do not see how you can remain silent as Paul Gosar and his fellow
white Christian nationalist travelers incite hatred and make life worse and threaten democracy in the name of an Anglo-Saxon Jesus, an Anglo-Saxon Christ. Represent.
So there you could see that I tried to address both um, the enablers as well as the politician themselves. Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate that. And it did take some rehearsing just to figure out what I wanted to say. And I did incorporate developments that happened subsequent to writing the letter. So obviously, since writing the letter, a lot of these politicians have continued and doubled down on their racism, their xenophobia. And I think that's another way I didn't mention to go in terms of a strategy for the video is to make a connection between what we talked about in the letter and perhaps a more recent development, such as Josh Hawley being the only senator to vote against the hate crimes bill, right? So that's I guess that's all we have the time for. Thank you so much for sticking around. Thank you so much for signing the letter. If you are free at 5, I'm going to be hosting a town hall, which will feature Ariane Ong, who is been a longtime activist, as well as just laying out the case for the open letter. But if you don't have time, I totally understand. This is it's so great to see people wanting to get involved like this. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any further questions about this initiative. Take care. Thank you, Douglas and Hans and Tony and my wife Naomi for participating in this webinar. Thank you. See you soon.